In your view, how does this inner upheaval that Merton talks about relate to what we refer to as the dark nights of the heart and the soul, or the senses and the soul?
Yeah. Well, it's a terrific question. I think I'm not sure how to put it. I'm kind of thinking, just at loss for words for a minute. They're both kind of unique. I'm not sure which one is more general or larger. The way Merton is talking here about the inner upheaval is kind of the ceiling we put on our soul, and a kind of a cap on things. And when we go through that, and we're underneath that, or we've transcended in some kind of way, but it's no longer pinning us down, then we're in kind of what John of the Cross talked about as a dark night, where you don't have anything to see. You have nothing to go on. As long as you have something to go on, you've got a light. Maybe it's an artificial light, and you can see where you're going and see what you're thinking and see what you're doing. But the way John of the Cross is talking about the dark night, he's not talking about, if you're not familiar with him, it's not depression. It's not, but it is this sense of a human being experiencing God and having nothing to cling to, nothing to go on. And for John of the Cross, you have to go through that darkness. I won't go too much further, but if you've read John of the Cross, you know how deep that whole idea goes. I think here for Merton, it is really kind of a more of a psychological kind of falsity that we have to blast through, that's a little bit more shallower than the Dark Night. One of his worst books, in his opinion, was the book he wrote on John of the Cross, called Ascent of the Soul. And he just loved John of the Cross. And Ascent to Truth, that's the name of it, I'm sorry. Ascent to Truth. But he tried to write about John of the Cross instead of expressing his own life. Most of his books that are so good, Contemplation and World of Action, Thoughts in Solitude, his autobiography, New Seeds of Contemplation, which is his probably greatest book, most seminal work, all come out of him. But when he tried to write about John of the Cross, and as much as he identified with him, he kind of deadened it a little bit. Though if you love John of the Cross, you can get a lot of value out of it. But he couldn't express himself that well, and he faulted himself for what he did, kind of capsized on John. That's a terrible response to the question, but I just think he's just psychologically more tight with this individual kind of breakthrough. But I'll say one more thing about John of the Cross, though. Remember, he teaches us that when we sense, and Merton picked up on this, when we feel God working in us, we tend to think that's inspiration, and we're feeling it, we're in the Spirit. John of the Cross actually taught, this is why the dark night of the soul becomes so important, that when God works in you, when He really works in you the most, you don't feel it. You think He's gone. It's when you sense God is absent from you. That's why the dark night is so terrifying to somebody. I don't have a conception of God. I remember Mother Teresa saying similar things recently. But all these other times when we think God is working in us, and oh, the Lord's led me, and the Lord's told me this, that's probably more than likely us kind of interpreting and saying some things. But when God's actually growing you and nurturing you, you don't necessarily sense it at all. And so that sensitizes the soul to start to get comfortable with, I don't know what's going on, and kind of prefer that to the confidence of the religious person who knows what's going on, and I know exactly how God works, and this is how He's worked in my life, and it's amazing. Well, that's not what John of the Cross said. It's not how Merton understood it.
Oh, Teilhard de Chardin. I don't remember if Teilhard came first or Merton came first, or...
If who came first?
Who came first?
Oh, no, this is Abbott and Costello, right? The who's on first, what's on second, I don't know, is on third, I think if I remember right. Yeah, well, what's on... now, who did you say besides Merton who came first?
Teilhard de Chardin.
Oh,
Reality.
Oh. Yeah, I think Chardin came before. Chardin. was earlier. Merton did read him and thought he was quite something. But I don't remember his dates right now, but I do think he was before that.
So Merton knew him.
I don't think he knew him personally, but he knew some of his writings. Seemed like Chardin, I don't know, I want to say he died in the 60s. Merton died in 68, but maybe the 50s, but I don't recall the dates. But I do know Chardin was in trouble early in the century when Merton was a kid, so Chardin came first.
Who were Merton's mentors that sort of bubble up to the top in your mind?
Wow, that's a good question. He had mentors all the way through his life. Jacques Merton, a French theologian, was very heavy as an influence on Merton. Some of his professors at Columbia, Dan Walsh and Mark Van Doren, who taught English, taught Dante, they stayed mentors to him all his life. Some of his friends he had in college he stayed in contact with, and they were kind of mentors in another kind of way, in a friendly iron sharpens iron sort of way. But then books and writings and people in history became mentors. He thought he was a 14th century man. So anybody from the 14th century, John Rosebrecht, who I'd really recommend to you. Rosebrecht talks about the living life. I just think that's a wonderful phrase. Rosebrecht, well, I can give you the American publication version, and he's Flemish, so it's Ruyschbroeck. Rosebrecht. Some spellings have two U's at the beginning, and then you see some other kangaroo spellings with a couple O's and that kind of a thing. But John's his first name, that's easy. He's a contemporary of Eckhart. So kind of from the area of Belgium. But Cloud of Unknowing, so those spiritual giants, the Desert Fathers and the Patristic Fathers, these were all mentors in the written word kind of sense. And of course, he had some spiritual guidance at the monastery as well. And there's some other people, but he so quickly became a mentor to other people. It's a tough one. But I'd say this guy, to me, was very humble because he was always open to learning from anybody. So he was such a prone to be and ready to be educated by anybody who could tell him something real. This is what you could easily mentor him. So when he heard Bob Dylan for the first time, he wanted to hear more Bob Dylan. He thought he could learn from Bob Dylan. Joan Baez, I'm getting ahead, that's the 60s, but Joan Baez said, Merton, we need you on the streets. The movement is going. We need your voice. But he wasn't going to leave the monastery. But he jazz music. He wanted to watch some Japanese movies toward the end. I mean, he was just open to, and that's a spirit of openness to mentoring, being guided, being taught. That's a sign of humility.
Is there a difference between feeling something and sensing something? It seems to be that those words are used interchangeably, and I was wondering if it would have a difference in what you were trying to convey.
Well, I'm always trying to convey something, and I never know if I'm thinking it or feeling it or sensing it or saying it or I don't know the difference, but I sense and I feel a difference with both. One of the traditions in our faith is this conception of spiritual senses, that our soul has faculties. And this is where the intellect originally came from, and the will. Memory was a faculty of the soul, according to St. Augustine, St. Bernard, and others. And so the soul has faculties that then sort of get translated through our empirical lives, our sensing equipment, our feelings, our emotional stuff, and through our head. The intellect was the highest part of the soul. It was not reason. It was higher than reason. But they would talk about spiritual senses. And that kind of went out. When contemplation went out as a term that was, everybody knew what they were sort of, it was very common. About 1650 on, we start to lose contemplation. From 1650 on, we start to lose spiritual faculties. Everything becomes reason and figuring out, or through the physical senses. And we cut ourselves off spiritually. So when we're in a tough place today, trying to regather what our soul is to this life of our life. And what we're trained in our feelings and our thoughts, but we don't have that training and that spiritual sensibility. So we don't really have the terms anymore, it doesn't seem like, to where we would be clear on those kinds of distinctions. Or what it is exactly that we sense. To me, sensing is a little more general than feeling. I can feel something, but then I can sense something that seems like a different sensation in me than a feeling. But for the life of me, I have no idea. I don't know what. There's some great research in emotions in Australia, an institute study the history of emotions. We've studied the history of human thought. That dawned on some intellectuals go, what about how people have felt? Have people felt differently over time? Do emotions develop in a person's life like thought develops? Well, they're studying that. And they're studying that our emotional sensibility has evolved in cultural changes, movements, and things like that. That's kind of fascinating. We're just starting to, sense that.
I read this a while ago, but it came to me when I was preparing to come here, and it's from the seven-story mountain, but it's just a couple lines that really touched me, and that's Mark Van Doren, the gentleman, his mentor you just spoke of, would come into a room and without any fuss would start talking about whatever was to be talked about. Most of the time he asked questions. His questions were very good, and if you tried to answer them intelligently, you found yourself saying excellent things that you did not know you knew and that you had not, in fact, known before.
Oh.
I just thought that was a wonderful.
Yeah, no, that is, and that's I appreciate you pulling it out. What a beautiful quote, and it's really so much more eloquent in describing this sense in which you, kind of what we were talking about earlier about expressing, and you don't know where this is coming from, and but the ground is open. I mean, there's a clearing, and the soul can come out, and something gets expressed, and you had no idea that was in you. You had no idea that your life was like this or had this to it. Until somebody comes in and they don't do anything, but they're open to it as well. And who knows what it is where we feel or think or see it. But somehow when it becomes okay to sense this, you kind of open up and you feel yourself thinking and feeling and maybe even eventually doing things that you would not have dreamed of possible before. It's not a rational kind of thing. It's not an irrational kind of thing, but it's a kind of awakening of one's life. And people do this to each other. I mean, kids, their parents are the first ones that awaken them to what the heck is going on. But then they can so quickly start to curb it. Well, I'll tell you what's going on. It is, we're all Republicans in this family, or we're all Democrats and we're Unionists, and then you will be one of the Joneses, and we're going to do all this. We can start to lose that openness. So when a teacher like Van Doren comes into a classroom and does not try to lay knowledge heavy on people, they can use their minds instead of chunking their minds out the window and repeating what someone else just said. How can you think that way? You can't learn anything if you're just repeating what someone else knows. You have to know yourself. And you can't know anything yourself as a spiritual person if you don't experience anything yourself. So that's that breaking out that we have to get out of. To where we can experience, but we don't know what we're going to do. We don't know, and that puts us right back in. So we stay on the shore.
Dr. Gray, we're ready to experience lunch.
Okay, very good.